witnesses for sharing their stories with us today. I'll recognize Ms. Chester Lamb.
Thank you, Chairman Duncan, Ranking Member
You
Sears.
can cut the microphone on, just push that little button.
All right. Thank you, Chairman Duncan, Ranking Member Sears, and members of the committee for your leadership attention to this important matter to America and throughout the United States. We've been waiting a long time. My name is Carolyn Chester. I live in Omaha, Nebraska. I'm a single divorced mother of one teenage son, and I've been the sole supporter of my family since 2010. I have a modest house, I live a modest lifestyle, and I drive a 16-year-old car. I represent my family's claim number 1704. My father was Edmund Chester, and he was the director of CBS News, but most of you probably have never heard of him. My father supervised famed reporters such as Edward R. Murrell, Eric Sebright, and Howard K. Smith, all recognizable names, but not his. My father was a true patriot, combated communism as a soldier in World War I, an executive with CBS when he worked with our State Department's Office for Inter-American Affairs, Voice of America. When the communists took Cuba, they also took over the radio stations, TV stations, newspapers, and they were able to manipulate and rewrite history. That is when the lies and slanders of those that were in Cuba before 1959 started. My father's best friends were all patriots, and one of them was my godfather, General T. McInerney, who served as Lieutenant Colonel under General Eisenhower's staff and the Director of Public Relations for the U.S. Department of Justice. Excuse me, I'm a little nervous. I was just 6 months old when my family's properties were taken, so I refer to the letter that my father wrote to the Foreign Claims Settlement Commission, which explains the circumstances. Their property was actually taken in January 1959, before Castro created laws to make it legal to steal. They took an 80-acre farm from the Isle of Pines, Cuban telephone stock, our car, jewelry, furniture, and all our personal possessions that were in our apartment in Miramar. My parents spoke frequently about Cuba and what happened to them, and they thought justice would be served during their lifetime, but it was not. There was a time that our legislator and fellow Americans cared, but with time and memories passing, the confiscation has faded. It is almost as if the event has been erased from time and history. However, this still happened. It's very real, personal to us, and just because it happened a long time ago does not mean it didn't happen, because it did. I know from speaking to people about the U.S. certified claims that most don't understand anything about it, but it's very simple. We are Americans who were living, working, investing in Cuba when the communists took over and took our properties. We were not at war with Cuba, and this was the first time in U.S. history that American properties were expropriated during peacetime. Families lost their livelihood, suffered financial ruin for the loss of their possession. Castro didn't just confiscate our properties, but he also took the hopes, dreams that our parents once had for our future. Excuse me. The confiscation also affected my father's health. I was only 11 years old when his health began to decline. I remember that my father was in and out of hospital many times over the years, and my mother took care of him for many years, always hoping that he would improve, but he did not. Edmund Chester died in 1973 when I was 15 years old, and I never really knew what he died from, but looking back at it, I think it was from the Cuban loss and the stress. It caused him a series of strokes. He also suffered from bouts of confusion. I remember one incident when I was just a little girl. He was frightened because he thought the Castro's henchmen were in the house wanting to kill him, but nobody was there. So it was not until much later on in life that I understood why he was so scared. In 1959, a group of Castro's men shot at our home as they drove into our driveway. I remember hearing about this when I got older, and I also remember seeing the bullet holes in our wall of our family home in Mount Dora, Florida. So his paranoia was not unwarranted. After my father passed away, my mother was left alone to raise our children without any source of income. My mother did the best she could, and in the end, she sold everything, including personal items, to survive and support us. We never faulted her for selling our inheritance in order to make ends meet, and in the end, we were left with debt to pay back her creditors. We didn't abandon our properties, they were taken from us. And in many cases, claimants' properties were taken at gunpoint by Castro's soldiers. We didn't have any warning by our government that the new Cuban government was planning to steal our properties, yet apparently Castro's manifesto was written years ago and published in Mexico. He threatened that he would do this, and he did. And our government failed to protect us, and now some 55 years later, here we are defending our claims. We are Americans who were the victims and not the culprits. The notion that claimants should discount their claims in order to make way for commerce is unacceptable. We are not responsible for the economic failures of communism since we've already paid with our family fortunes. Furthermore, punitive damages for the pain and suffering that this has caused our families, along with 55 years of waiting, should have been included in this determination of the value of our claims. All foreign businesses have 50-50 partnerships with the Cuban government, so that means profits are being split. The United Kingdom and Canada, who are our allies, have enacted laws to protect their Cuban investments from our Helms-Burton Act. When a foreign company operating in Cuba pays their workers' salaries, it must all go to the Cuban government, who keeps 96% of it, leaving their worker with a pittance of their salary, and so they are treated as slaves. The Cuban government also collects lots of money from skimming off the remittance sent by Cuban Americans to their relatives in Cuba. The Cuban government does have a way to pay us back. They just don't want to because they're used to taking. I know that many will still think that the Cuban government is poor, and that's fine. But you must realize that once the floodgates of trade with the U.S. opens, there will be a means to pay us back, and we will accept payments as long as it's paid back in full. It is also very disturbing for me to hear that those working uncomfortably close with the Cuban government, Americans, tell us that we should only get pennies to our dollar. It is a well-known fact that the junta running Cuba has hired expert international accountants and lawyers to hide their fortune in offshore accounts that can never be traced. Our Office of Foreign Asset Control has collected billions and billions in fines from banks and businesses that broke our laws, so a portion of that money should have been used to pay back the American. Another solution would be to get another entity to pay our debt. There are a lot of U.S. conglomerates that are biting at the bit to do business with the Cubans, and if they want to get rid of us because they cause the obstacle, they should just buy our debt and deal with the Castros themselves, because we've been dealing with it for 55 years. There's also Cuban money that was frozen a long time ago that should have been part of the legislation, but that was admitted. And all we want is our payment for our claims set by the foreign claims settlement, and I think 55 years of a lifetime is waiting too long. Thank you for your attention to this matter. I'm finally feeling like someone gives a damn. God bless you.